everyone. This is a quick impromptu meeting with my friend Christina, who is also on the Utah State's Board of Education.
Mhm.
And she's also a teacher. And I was not planning on having this meeting. I don't usually do these on Sundays, but I thought that it was important that before I take off, that we have this discussion about some of the more concerning things that I sent to her about some of the links on the Nebo school board page, the climate page, things that I believed as a parent and as an advocate, we'd done the work to get out. So I thought that our schools were going to be a little safer this year. But after seeing these images, I'm not so sure that that's the case. So I thought that on August 1st, which does give them a few weeks, but it doesn't
Mhm.
look like it looks to me like this is a double down from what I've seen, as opposed to um as opposed to a cleaning out. It looks like a double down
Yeah. So
on
could I
yeah,
question you?
yeah, go
Is it
ahead.
a double down to what you expected, or is it a double down to what you have seen, or
Mm,
both?
mm. Well, I believed that the rule was supposed to stop ideology from being in K-12 ed.
So it was definitely publicized as such, and the Utah, what we would call the legacy or the Utah mainstream media, really put out HB 261 is going to do all of these things. Even members of the legislature put out that propaganda. And I know that's heavy language, but that's what it is. When we look at the actual bill language, what what was reported or purported is not what's in the bill. And we really do struggle with that in Utah.
Right.
We write bills with wonderful romantic language and we accept them into nothingness, which really makes the passage of that bill a public placation. So we placate the public by passing useless words. And
See,
I don't know that we're all the way there with this one because there were some things that did happen that were really positive, but there were things that were, and I'll air quote, supposed to happen that will never happen. And I think that that's where your struggle might be.
yeah, let's break it down because the things so I ended up calling this bill the baby step bill.
Hmm.
And I spoke with the people, I worked with the people, I gave insight into helping with this bill. And the reason we called it the baby step bill is because it was just the very basics of what we could do. Unfortunately, there was a lot of hyperbolic, there was a lot of emotions
Hmm.
brought in, so
Yeah.
much that wasn't based in reason, wasn't based in logic, where
Or
it
in
was
fact, oftentimes.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. Absolutely. It was some of the things being said were complete lies.
Hmm.
This is the bill that if you watched on KSL, if you watched on the Trib, people dressed in funeral clothes and pretended that this was the end of democracy for Utah. Now, mind you, the bill was called Equal Opportunities Initiatives.
Hmm.
That was the focus. Equal Opportunities Initiative. All we wanted um, were equal opportunities. Nobody was going to take away. In fact, there were places where I thought, no, that should be taken away. And they didn't agree with that. And that
Hmm.
was fine because that's you have to give and take. But it
Yes.
seems to me like we got very little of the give from this page that I'm looking at.
Yeah. Well, and if that is what you have shared with me, you're probably looking at some stuff about welcoming schools, you're looking at
Right.
DEI initiatives, you're looking at some of those things where people expected that to be removed from our schools,
Right.
and they're seeing actually an install or even a rebrand, if you will.
Right.
So they're seeing the initiative furthered along as well as a rebranded initiative. Is that what you're sharing with me?
Tips on creating an inclusive school and why it matters, a checklist for welcoming an inclusive school environment, classroom climate inventory, teaching development, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which specifically some people were calling this the anti-DEI bill.
Mm-hmm.
So this seems like a double down. 10 tips to start your GSA club. from Glisten, um, and welcoming schools. And I think there's a lot of parents out there. I think it's important first to tell you that Christina is not just a school board member, she's actually currently an educator.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's a lot of parents out there who will see the word welcoming schools and think that I'm the most hateful person in the world because I do not support this type of a welcoming school. Can you explain the difference between what people think welcoming is and what this means?
Yeah, I could only speak from my personal experience and having been trained in this. When I defined welcoming schools to people who had asked for like this unvarnished, really raw, sometimes I'm famous for that raw distilled version of the truth. And I said it is how to create an environment where everyone is so quick to offense that no one feels comfortable. It's all the things that you should be offended about. And if you're not offended, then you're doing something wrong. And everyone just walks around on eggshells all the time, and no one feels welcome. No one feels like they can, this language is used a lot in schools, speak your truth. No one feels like they can speak their truth for fear of offending somebody. And the welcoming schools training really cultivates and nurtures an environment where you have like 59 bad mother-in-laws, and they're all in the same place at the same time, and everybody's trying not to offend everybody. So it's a very hostile space and place. And if executed as intended, it's a violation of the First Amendment. It results in compelled speech. It also coerces speech. Even says that you can't say things, which we come into the First Amendment. And if you're in that space, you're in a bad space when you come into the First Amendment. And the welcoming schools training, and you could put quotes about it and use the brand or just that vein of training. You're in a space and place where you've got a very hostile environment, a very tenuous environment, and in an environment where no one is happy or they're closeted. They're going to go into the closet and just say nothing. And then everybody will say, well, you didn't say anything. Well, of course I couldn't, because then I would have violated the protocol and enacted the sequence of triggers that result in discipline for speaking my truth.
So is that discipline for educators as well as students, or
Yes,
primarily for educators,
it's for
or
both.
it's for both?
Yes.
And so I saw something else that I found alarming over the last month, and that was a reporter's toolkit, a kit for how you should do daily reporting, and both for teachers and for students. And I thought that, how does that make a school welcoming?
Well, it doesn't. Um, just as an example, in my career, we had a situation where we were supposed to be reflective, and that sounded great. And I always try to be reflective. In fact, I spent half of my summer being reflective, planning for my fall. As we shared earlier, I've been spending the last few weeks doing that. And you get into a space and place where we we send people in to help others be reflective, and really they're just ticking off everything that could be considered. I'm air quoting again because these are words on papers. Everything that could be considered a microaggression, a macroaggression that could be misperceived. And then at the end of that observation, then they provide that with you. And if you don't believe you have a problem, then something's wrong with you. And if there is a problem, then something's wrong. I'm like, seriously? It builds an environment where you're never sure of yourself. You can never be confident in how you're engaging with the humans around you, and where everyone is constantly looking for wrong in others. And so we're constantly tearing everyone down as opposed to building them up. And the same happens for students, and it happens for educators and other employees within that educational framework. And it creates a very hostile work environment. It creates a very litigious, if you will, work environment, because someone's always turning somebody in.
Right.
And I
I
don't know, I know you're a student of history. Do you recall which regime it was where everybody turned everybody else in?
right. Yes, it's
Yeah.
extremely Soviet. It's
Yes.
extremely Soviet.
Mhm.
I was wondering, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I had a question but then you brought that thing up. But yes, yes, the idea of turning in each other seems like the least welcoming place that we could possibly be in.
Mhm.
Now, in in regards to 53G, when it
Yeah.
was created,
Mhm.
I need to give people the benefit of the doubt that they saw a problem and
Mhm.
that they wanted to stop it. What were the roadblocks in stopping it?
Well, I think you've got a manifold issue here. So one is they didn't have the votes to do it right.
Mm.
And so when we are technically a blue state with a red label, it's very hard to pass conservative policies. If we actually authentically had the red supermajority that they say we have, we would be passing very different policies. So that's a roadblock when your intent or your desire is to pass quality conservative policy and you can't, that's a roadblock. And so the other things that are in a place and space are everything from all the exceptions that they wrote into the bill to funding mechanisms and things that prevent things. And I'm going to take you over here.
Yeah,
Hopefully you can see that. I
yeah, I
searched up
can see it.
here and it just says accept. That's what I searched. And right here we have the prohibition of the use of certain submissions in public education,
Christina, can anybody go to
exceptions.
this? Can anyone go to this and pull up this bill, or do you have to have certain access to be able to pull this up?
No, you don't have to have certain access. You could Google HB 261 Utah 2024.
Okay.
And then I just downloaded the PDF
Okay.
and I put it onto my computer so that I can engage with it differently. Um, and so obviously this is certain submissions, but in every one of these high umbrella issues, you have a list of exceptions. And this bill follows a pretty specific pattern. It'll have a section and then it'll say, except as provided in subsections 4 and 6. So you have a pattern of the way the bill is written, and the exceptions have a pattern. And typically they're found in subsections 4 and 6. So right now you're talking about prohibited submissions, then you'll talk about prohibited discriminatory practices, and you'll talk about prohibited X in different sections. And there's always exceptions. So if you go there, and actually we're on line 485, but we
Okay.
knew that there were exceptions because in the highlighted provision, it actually says provides exceptions to the prohibitions.
Wow.
So when the bill synopsis says, hey, we're going to accept this, that should be a clue to the taxpayer or the citizen that something in here is probably not right. And I think you're right. I think there were a lot of good intentions with some um, poor outcomes. And so as we come in here, we're going to see this exception start to lay out. I'm going to come in here again so that I can find it. And we come in here and we're going to see except as provided by. If federal law requires it, then they can require it. And then in K-12 ed, you've got the US Department of Education, which is a rulemaking agency, and you've got all these things. You've got everything from ESSER in 2015 to Title I funding to Department of Agriculture funding, which has since been tied to other ideologies. And when people thought this was going to be dealt with, except as required here, this is obviously prohibited submissions, but this goes throughout this prohibited training. Um, the exceptions are except as provided with, except as provided in, except as, and so if you just go up here, there's 16 times except as provided in subsection 4B, which is a different
Wow.
exception. But my whole point is um, that this has been accepted to the point
It
that
erased
schools,
so much.
it erases, yeah, it erases, and schools can pretty much do whatever they want, or they can do what they've been doing under a new umbrella. or a new label.
I had heard somebody said that the incumbent in my race had had accepted a lot of things because the federal government basically threatened them. And what would you do if that were the case? We don't do, I mean, are we in such desperate places that we need to take this money or take whatever incentives they give to bring these things in? Are they making our schools any better to have any of these? What are the things that, I mean, I do know that out here we're getting a lot of new, very large, very, I think over the top schools.
Mhm.
Is that where this comes from? We will give you
No.
this if you do that. No.
No, so your capital outlay funding is different, and if that's coming from the federal government, I have no knowledge of it. It could be, but
Okay.
I have no knowledge of that. Your money that comes in that mandates this kind of ideological framework and training is going to be from the federal government. It also could be from the USBE, but you're looking at specifically ESSER and SNSER funds that are going to tie that Title I funding, then ties you to the U.S.
Can you
Department of
explain what those
Education.
two things are just for people who've literally never heard and this is the first time they're getting.
Oh, goodness. So every Student Succeeds Act is and has sometimes been dubbed like not No Child Left Behind, Common Core 2.0.
Okay.
It's got a lot of
And that has brought in a
gobbledygook in
lot of
there.
ideology, right? Like
Oh yes, very much so.
Common Core just started with like basically watering. I'm just trying to make this as simple as I can for people.
Hmm.
Common Core came in and watered things down for the most, I mean, almost took away learning. And then this new 2.0 is kind of layering what they really want the kids to learn.
Yes, it took it out of the academic framework and into the ideological framework, if you will. And again, we're keeping this very high level.
Yes.
So if people want to disagree with us, that's fine, but this is high level stuff.
Right.
And then ESSER funds came, if I recall correctly, on the cusp of COVID,
That's right. Yeah.
the recovery. And and you had a lot of stuff. In fact, in the recent governor's race, you see a lot of people talking about the fact that ideology and the DEI initiatives were actually shoved down the throats of Utahns through the money that was accepted through that COVID recovery package.
Right.
And again, high level, right?
Right.
But it's there, and now it's mandated in our schools because it was a bait and switch. You take the money only if you will. Well, now we're accepted into you will, except as
Right.
required by, ergo, we will.
All right. So, what can our parents do? Because I thought, I mean, I literally put out a thing today and said, this is illegal. And I know that right now, well, I think starting on August 1st,
Mm-hmm.
but you're supposed to be able to report anything DEI that you see in schools, anything that abuses equity, anything that is forcing people to do things against their conscience. You're supposed to be able to report that and they're supposed to be held accountable for it. But it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that what they're doing is saying they're using that accept. They're using those exception policies, which means what for our parents, what for our families.
Well, it means not good things. If this is something that you are opposed to as a parent, it means that you're in a place and space where you're going to continue to be frustrated because those accept clauses are going to continue to give the infractions, we'll put that in quotes, if you will, what is a parent perceived infraction, it's going to continue to give it a free pass.
Every time. There's nothing.
Pretty much every time. And to further that, your state board of education passed a policy that allows a school district to merely create a policy that conflicts with state code or with board rule. And as long as there's a conflicting policy in place, then the state doesn't do anything to people who do that stuff.
This is that
Um,
local control. This
it,
is
it's a it is a very interesting way of producing what we call general control and supervision, but it's R277217 where they put that escape hatch in there. I'm proud to say I refuse to vote for that, but I don't think any local policy should conflict with state law. And so I think you're going to see a long train of events here as we get into the new school season. We're going to see parents who have certain expectations of what's supposed to happen in this realm, in this neighborhood. It's not going to happen. They're going to file complaints, and there's going to be no wrongdoing found because of the exception clauses and because we have a poorly crafted board rule. And I think the solution, if this is not what you want for your children,
Right.
get them out. And
Okay.
I don't have, I know that's, you know,
I know.
but there's no solution to waiting. It's 6 months till the next session. The legislative session will come and go. Maybe they will address this, maybe they won't. Even if they do, there'll be a long-term plan for installation and adaptation, and then it'll be another year. And your child has set in this ideological framework, being trained within this ideological framework for an entire school year, while we wait on our policymakers to get it right.
Well, and I just, right before speaking with you, I was speaking with a teacher who
Mhm.
said, I'm getting sent stuff. She's getting sent stuff for math and how to make math more inclusive, math more focused on race, more bringing out that critical conversation,
Mhm.
right? And here's the deal. When we put our students into this and we say, oh, well, we'll pull them out and we'll have these conversations at home, we'll do what we can at home. Um, and it's really hard for me. Like I get emotional about this because you know my situation. You know that I've got
Mhm.
one child and I want normalcy for that one
Mhm.
child. However, when I see all of this stuff on this list, this looks like queer schools. This looks like the queering of education.
Mhm.
And again, queering, for anybody who hasn't heard me say this a million times, queering is not anti-lesbian or gay.
Mhm.
Queering means to take the idea of truth at all, any objective reality, away from the child.
Mhm.
So, and that's what welcoming means. Welcoming means that we're only bringing in ideas, only the ideas that we like are what's going to be taught in our schools. And we are not we. We are not we.
Yeah.
We are what the NEA and the UEA want.
Well, and
Okay, so go ahead.
I think we need to remember when you talk about this idea of ideas, it's not universal. It's that which casts a lightning rod to what we would call universal truth.
Mhm.
It casts a lightning rod into empirical truth. It casts a lightning rod into this, and you're left questioning everything. Just as we talked about how that when you have an environment where teachers are constantly criticized and they're constantly left questioning themselves and their own efficacy in how they engage with their classroom, with their students, and they're constantly questioning, they become very insecure,
Right.
become deeply rooted insecurity will manifest, and it will manifest in different behaviors, not just in how you issue instruction, but how you assess that instruction and assess skill acquisition of your students. And when you think about that on an adult level, it creates a very toxic and unhealthy work environment. But think about what our children are going through right now and the data with that. So when you thrust that upon children, when you're sending those lightning rods, with this idea of what do they call it? Oh, it has a name. I can't remember it right now, but it's the idea that there is no objective truth.
Right.
And when you thrust that upon children, they start to question, and they question to the point where they literally have no foundation.
Mhm.
And when their foundation, and I don't care what that foundation is,
Right.
but if you don't have a solid foundation upon which to build, your forward movement, You'll blow with any wind
And
of
that's what they're now calling, and the new word for it, you'll hear it quite a bit. They will
Mhm.
focus on, they want our children to be quote unquote resilient.
Mm.
And that's what that means. That means they are okay with being tossed to and from and having no solid foundation. But I need to go back
Wow.
to, I know it's hard to
Well, I don't even know how to respond to that
I know, I know.
because when when you're in the classroom, when kids are rooted, they don't even have to be rooted in that which I believe in.
Exactly.
When
Exactly.
they are rooted, they have grit,
Yes.
tenacity, forward movement, inquiry.
Yeah.
And when they're confused all the time, it becomes this normal state of being for them.
So Angela Duckworth, just because you said grit, Angela Duckworth wrote the book Grit.
Mm-hmm.
And when she saw what they were doing with resilience, she backed out of their program because she was going, this is not correct.
Mm-hmm.
This is not true resilience. I just looked it up because I have it up on my bookshelf there. But so we're twisting the words.
Oh, yes.
But my big thing in terms of what I saw here, in terms of these papers that are like they're doubling down,
Mm-hmm.
there has to be at least the best practice that you can do, because we need to be realistic. We have people with very large homes and double incomes. They do
Mm-hmm.
not see a way to pull their children out. Um, One thing that I want to do is create this group of informed parents who are ready to support people like you and other people on the board who want to do the right thing, because I think that the votes could be there if they knew that parents cared. But you're right, not this year.
Oh, not this year. And
So,
and I
yeah,
think we have to really start looking at the financial disclosures of those who ran for the Board of Education.
yeah,
Because we have people who got into, I'm from the Midwest. We use the term getting in bed with.
yeah,
There are some people
fine.
who got in bed with people with really dirty intentions and really dirty money. So when you look at that, and even taking that back to the last election cycle,
Yeah,
you know what way somebody's going to vote because money talks.
right.
And you could get phone calls and emails from 1,000 constituents, and they don't care. They're going to vote with the money every time. And that has been a pattern. I have yet to see that pattern break. And I think we're going to see people who we thought were our allies bend toward the waves of the negative because they accepted money from these players who want things that are in opposition to Utah values.
Okay, so let's talk about Utah values. There's another
Mhm.
bill, and I'm again, normally I would have a list and I would have this in front of me, but I
Mhm.
don't tonight. All right, there's the rights of conscious.
Oh yeah, 205. It ended up, it was HB 348. I believe it passed in 2022.
Yes. All right. This bill is still useful. Yes.
Yeah. I would
Can
say
we
yes.
explain it real quick?
So yeah, it ended up being, I call it the 205 code. Cheryl Acton ran this bill. It was, gosh, probably, dare I say, seismic, because it has thrown a lightning rod at schools being able to abuse children and families into conforming and complying in exchange for a diploma,
Okay.
in exchange for playing on the basketball team. You have to compromise your convictions in exchange for X. And I made those two examples up, but a diploma is one because the USBE has purposefully voted to violate this code. And I believe it's 700. I think it was 277 700. There
Okay.
was a vote where the vast majority of people on the board, I think all but three, voted to allow schools to force children to violate their conscience or parents in exchange for a high school diploma. So we have some decently nefarious stuff happening here. This bill says it isn't right in the 205 section. It says that in accordance with the Utah Constitution, Article 1, Section 4. So we're talking about a constitutional right. We're not just talking about the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. We're talking about the Utah Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, which may only be changed by an act of the legislature and a subsequent vote of the people. That a student may refrain from participation in any aspect of school that violates a religious belief or right of conscience of the student, and that a school may not in any way require or incentivize a student to affirm or deny the student's religious belief or right of conscience. It goes on. And this bill was very well written. I think it does good work for not just rights of conscience, but for religious freedom. I think it does good work for people who choose not to be subjected to certain ideological frameworks. And I'm not talking about information about.
Right.
I think people
Right.
misunderstand that. They're like, oh, well, don't you want your child to know what people of the Islamic tradition believe? Well, I teach them that at home.
Right.
What I don't want you to do is teach them to be Muslim.
Right.
Because in our home, we have a different faith.
Right.
And I would argue that people who are Muslim don't want you to indoctrinate their children to be Jewish.
Or Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah,
Or
absolutely.
Buddhist.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a space and place in time where this does really good work, because there is a difference between knowing about something and being trained in something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we're doing a lot of training in.
Yes.
That's what you need to realize. Everything. I want to go down this list one more time.
Mm-hmm.
This is tips on creating inclusive schools and why it matters. This is a checklist for welcoming an inclusive school environment. Classroom climate inventory, teaching development. This is surveys. The climate inventory is lots and lots and lots of surveys. And the surveys seed ideas into your children that once they hear one time, they're going to go, that thought is in their head. So you can go and say, oh, they're going to hear about it, and then I'm going to bring them home and we're going to talk about the truth. But the reality is that once they hear it one time, once they hear, have you had more than 10 sexual partners? Once they hear something like that, they're going to realize that that's a norm. And, you know, they're going to start thinking about it. These are supposedly the most intelligent people in America are working on education. They know what they're doing.
Yeah. And I think we need to remember, as a teacher, just like I have so much more to do than give surveys.
Right.
I have limited instructional time. We're going in, we're shifting gears, we're moving sometimes for what feels to me. I obviously know it's not 200 miles an hour, but you know, to be a little hyperbolic, I'm moving 200 miles an hour because you know, and when I say I'm speaking of a proverbial teacher. I have to be on this day of the lesson on this week, and I have my PLC on this week, and then we have to be here, and then we do our exit ticket, and then we do our weekly thing. And you know, teachers, I tell people that they say one size doesn't fit all. They use this narrative language, and I'm like, have you seen the average public school teacher? Because they look like the cat in the hat.
Okay.
The idea that public school education is this broad brush, one size fits all, is actually absurd on its face. Because the amount of differentiation we use, the amount of changes in practices over time based on the interest survey of our students, the time we shift that transmission, trying to jiggle that gear into place so that we meet everybody's needs. Obviously, you and I both know we can't meet everybody's needs.
Right.
But the average public school teacher looks like the cat in the hat.
Yeah.
They're trying to carry it all, and they're trying to do it the best way they know how. Or they're trying to do it the way they've been trained. Either way, we all know that the cat in the hat eventually.
I can't even remember it.
Oh,
I think he leaves, right? He's like,
he crashes and burns. He crashes and burns and drops all this stuff. But my point being that we don't have time for all these surveys.
Right.
And most teachers, and when I say most, I do mean most. I'm speaking like I interface with hundreds of teachers every week in my day job. And when I say most, I would say 80% of them don't need a survey to tell them information because they are very attuned. And after you've been teaching a certain amount of time, I'm like, I didn't even need an assessment to tell me that. You
Right.
develop certain skills of observation and engagement where you can spot those things at 20 paces.
Right.
And the majority of the teachers I interface with, they don't need a survey.
Right.
And they're just that good at that part of their job.
Well, and I think that we had more welcoming schools before.
Oh, I would agree.
Even as a person of color, I just did not feel. Now I feel like people walk on eggshells around me. And now, well, yes, lefties walk on eggshells around me. But 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 it was never a thing before,
Mhm.
like, I mean, nobody ever needed to know my political standing for me to teach their children drama.
Yeah.
I'm sure they made their assumptions and they were oftentimes wrong,
Mhm.
but they made their assumptions, but I didn't you didn't need that to be a caring, compassionate human being. And we're saying that we need to bring all of this stuff in so that we can teach our kids to be compassionate, but this isn't teaching our kids to be compassionate. Much of this, many of the people who come out on the other side of the rainbow, that's how I like to put it.
Mhm.
People who come through out on the other side of gender ideology, oftentimes, um, they have to wrestle with children being taught to be narcissists. For that
Mm.
reason alone, I don't support this kind of education in our schools.
Yeah. And I think you opened up a can of worms for a whole different life.
Sorry.
No, and because I think that that is a conversation that would take another 40 minutes,
Yeah, right.
right? At least 40 minutes. And it's also not a conversation that you can really keep very high level.
That's
I,
true.
I believe both of us have done a pretty decent job of keeping this clear up here instead of getting down in the weeds. And I'm super proud of us for that. But
Yeah.
you opened up a can of worms that I go, whoa, doggy.
Sorry, it's just that's what I
No.
see when I see welcoming schools. When I
Mhm.
see welcoming schools, I see all sorts of mental health help for these
Yeah.
babies.
Mhm.
And I'm very, very concerned about it because
Well,
that's not what they need.
it's not what they need. And I would offer that it's not the proper role.
Right.
So
A
we
hundred
have to
percent.
remember that public schools are government funded, government regulated, and government supervised. They are government schools. Is it the proper role of government to socialize our children and provide them values?
So tell me this. If a large group of parents wrote letters and said, we will not be attending schools as long as this is what your goal is, would that change things faster? And if they kept to it?
I don't think it would change anything.
Really?
I don't, I know that you want me to say something else.
No, I
I
want you
I
to say the truth, but
I truly believe that people who are engaged in moving forward this movement are deeply convicted and nothing will stop them. And even um, breaking the law if necessary.
yeah,
It's one thing that I talked about when I ran for office. I've been trained by a number of institutions, consultants, all of these things throughout the years, and different districts across different states. And the number of times I've been trained in how to either circumvent or break the law would astonish you. So, all on your tax dollar, by the way.
wow.
So, and we've got the State Board of Education passing board rule that says you don't even have to abide by the law as long as your LEA is willing to pass a policy that conflicts with the law. So we're talking, and I shouldn't say they don't. That's not exactly what it says. I misspoke. They say we're not going to hold you accountable. for not abiding by the law, as long as your LEA has a policy that conflicts.
And then we hear school board members constantly say, we trust the LEAs, we trust the LEAs.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, Carrie. I really struggle because I do not believe in the centralization. I think the more we centralize, the more we become authoritarian.
Okay.
And so I have a lot of cognitive dissonance when it comes to that. We've got LEAs that have been left to police themselves and they suck at it. They have done an absolutely horrible job policing themselves and doing the right thing when no one is watching.
Right.
And so then we say, okay, well, the state has to take care of it. But once you start to centralize, you can't take that pathway back. You can't downshift from a centralization of power without this jolt. And I've never studied history and found a country that went down the pathway of centralization and authoritarianism that was able to find their way back without
Yeah.
blood, sweat, tears, and millions of lives.
I 100,000% agree with you. And this is my wheelhouse. So I completely agree with you there. I also believe we're already down that authoritarian road.
We are. We
And
are.
so since we're already very much down the road of everything that you just said, absolutely down it, there's got to be tools, there's got to be solutions for the people who can't snap their fingers and say, that's fine, we're not going to school. There's got to be solutions for them.
So I think there's a few solutions there. One is there are homeschool co-ops all over this state. And the homeschool community is very interesting in how do I want to say it? In every state, they have kind of their own niche, their own way they move and breathe. It's very organic and it's very community oriented. It's kind of like a niche community within a community. But in Utah, it's even better because it's like, oh, you're not really good at that. I'll take that. I'll teach your kids that. You teach my kids this. There are micro schools popping up of moms who want to stay home and teach their own babies, but they're going to teach your babies too because you maybe have to work 6 hours a day.
Right.
And so they teach different babies. There's homeschool co-ops, there's homeschool communities, there's micro schools. There's so much that happens in this state. And I have never watched a homeschool community that rises up to support, help, and mentor. I think that's the big one there, mentor.
Right.
So many mothers, they confuse motherhood with teacherhood when really it's kind of the same thing. To mother your children is to teach them. It's to disciple them. It's to train them in the ways of the world. You train them how to pack a lunch. You put this in first, you put the heavy stuff on bottom. People don't realize you just taught a lesson there. You taught a lesson about force and weight. You taught a lesson about even three-dimensional spatial awareness. You taught a lesson. And the homeschool community in this state is very good about mentoring mothers and fathers in teaching well inside the home and teaching in all subject areas. And if it's not your jam, trust me. I mean, we've got cardiac surgeons that are training young kids in biology in the homeschool community in this state.
Yeah.
We have people who have MEs and IEs and all of these things to train kids in physics and engineering and advanced math. And they're coming in and doing this work on a volunteer basis for kids in the homeschool community. And I think if you can find that, tap into it, and engage well, there's so much hope for your children and for you and for your religious freedom in this state.
Okay. And I completely, trust me, I teach in a homeschool co-op, so I
Yeah.
completely understand that but I need something for these other people. So how can a teacher, how can parents, um, how can parents vet teachers to know if they are, because I know that there are teachers, I've got some of them who,
Mhm,
tell me things on the down low, right?
mhm.
And so what can they do? How can they take your single parents, take your parents who just, they don't think, all they think is, maybe they think homeschooling is weird, maybe they think homeschooling, they can't afford it. I know that to put my son in full-time homeschool would be it would be an investment.
Mhm.
But because I teach, I do have some leeway, some things that I can put him in, right? I cannot believe that every one of our teachers is indoctrinated into the mess of this. I think that there are people who feel like their hands are tied,
Mhm.
and like, how do we support those teachers, and how do we find them to know the ones we should be supporting?
Well, I think it's going to be hard to find them because you're going to find that they are very closeted. They don't really speak out about their political views. They don't speak out when they find or take issue with in particular training. Some of them don't even know that they can. Some of them know that if they do, their life, their social world inside those four walls, if you will, becomes very toxic very quickly. A lot of teachers who dissent from this framework, they're called horrible names, they're ostracized, people won't sit with them at lunch. I mean, we're talking about very junior high behavior inside the workplace. So I don't know that they're just going to put a neon sign out and say, hey, I'm your safe place. Uh, but I think you're going to notice certain things about the way they teach.
Okay.
You're going to notice that they stick to the content and not the ideology. You're going to notice that they let kids draw conclusions, even if they disagree with them. You're going to notice that sometimes the kids will bring something in and their response is not going to be, you can't think that because you haven't considered X. You're going to see a teacher use a lot more Socratic, if you will, or even rabbinic, the rabbinic way of query. And they're going to say, so if you applied that framework in this context, would you get the same result or would you draw the same conclusion? You're not going to see them say, apply this framework and tell me if you're right.
Okay. Yeah.
You're, and maybe that's, I think there's that. I think you're going to find teachers who really just choose to stay as far away from it as possible because they know that it creates a tenuous relationship with parents. They know that it creates a tenuous relationship from parent to child. And we all know that when a child is firmly rooted at home, they do better in school.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so any teacher that truly understands that is not going to drive a wedge between parent and child.
Mm.
They're just not going to. Um, I think you're going to notice it everything from sometimes you just look at license plates and you're like, yay. um,
Yeah.
sometimes you'll drive through a school parking lot and you'll be like, wow, you've
Okay.
got 3 people without bumper stickers here. I'm giving ideas, but I don't
That's
think
great.
these teachers are going to wear neon signs.
No, I think that that's great. And I think that that's a perfect place to wrap, is that it's about the family.
It is about the family.
So
Mhm,
we have to acknowledge, I think most of us have to acknowledge that we have went for what's convenient.
mhm,
And we have been taken advantage of by going for what's convenient.
mhm.
We are presented with words that sound good, and it will make you question and go, how in the world could they be against the words welcoming and inclusive? They're so warm and cozy. But I'm against the words Black Lives Matter, because the words don't play out to the actions. I've done the
Yeah.
same work with Black Lives Matter that I have with queer theory in our schools.
Mhm.
It doesn't play out. It's not about stabilization for our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters. It's not about helping kids who are gender confused. It's about keeping them constantly confused and using them. And that
Yeah.
is why this is the hill I will die on.
Yeah.
This why, regardless of what people want to say and do, and threats, whatever else, we have these conversations because this is about
Yeah.
the family.
Well, and I think we need to continue to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to family, if family dinner is not on your priority list, it needs to be.
Right.
And I won't pretend that that is not hard. I was a single mother for well over a decade. It is not something that is easy, and I won't pretend that I was great at it.
Yeah.
But dinner time is important. Being there for your children is important. Showing up to parent teacher conference is important. Being at those basketball games is important. Um, and again, we all have busy lives, and it can get hard, but be there for your kids and show up for them, and keep your family bedrock as solid as you can.
Absolutely. And we're still, whether or not we can win or not, we're still going to send the letters. We're still going to show up because I think that at the very least,
Oh, yes.
moral support for people like you who are trying to do good is important.
Yes,
We got
they
to have
and that yeah, yeah, I'm stuttering over that because yes, I'm not saying don't write. I think people should write because we are a government of, by, and for the people. And we're talking about government schools. And Utah law says our schools have to be responsive to parents. That's in our legislative code. So when you have a district or a system that's not responsive to parents, if we don't have evidence of that, then where's that? So write those letters, make those phone calls, document your interaction with people. I just don't want people to have unrealistic expectations of what may come after that.
right.
Because as a board member, I have received literally thousands of emails saying, we want X. This is our expectation. And then been in the minority when voting for the will of the people.
Right.
So I want to make certain I don't want to leave people on that down, but absolutely rise up because it becomes a domino effect. And then we can say, hey, or I can say, you know what, we've just received 947 emails, and you're telling me that all these voices don't matter, but the three people who want this, none of whom have children in school, we're going to go ahead and go their direction. And I'm making up a situation,
Right.
but we have a lot of very similar situations.
I've seen them.
Yeah.
I've
So,
definitely seen
yeah,
those things.
make those phone calls, write those letters, have those conversations with your elected officials. Absolutely.
Christina, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And I will have you on again when I get back, and maybe we can discuss the deeper issues.
Awesome. Thanks so
So
much. I appreciate it.
I
Have fun
appreciate
at your wherever you're going.
yeah, camping for a long time with boys.
Yeah. Have
Okay.
fun doing that.
All
I
right.
hope you have a
Thank
great
you.
time. All
Thank
right. Take
you.
care. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Do you feel good about that?
Are we done?
Hang on.